our sort of overarching theme here is that we're promoting conservation of birds of prey in a variety of ways, but with a heavy emphasis on student involvement. And the three areas that we have undertaken are rehabilitation. We do a lot of public education, and then we have tried to do some captive breeding of targeted species, indigenous local raptors, and release those young birds out back into the wild. And out of that has sort of grown a program which over the past several years has sort of grown to have an undergraduate extracurricular emphasis, although we do have a formal classroom instruction and how to care for and manage birds of prey and so forth. And we've gone through a couple of different moves as facilities have been no longer available or in need of repair or what have you. And so in the past 5 years or so, we've been located here on the, I guess this would be the east end of the Poultry Science Complex, in some buildings, one of which we have modified for raptors and one which was built specifically for raptors. The Bondareff Raptor facility, named for Esther Bondareff, who was an alum of Cornell and has taken a vested interest in what we do here. Well, most of these birds are what we would refer to as our education birds. They're not birds that are rehabilitation cases any longer, and they're not breeding birds. They're birds that we have acquired in one way or another that are non-releasable and representative of a species or some bird of interest to us, and we use those to do our public education. We always have live birds to exhibit at those programs, and also to work with students and give them the opportunity to learn how to work with them, handle them, and so forth. Do the routine care over a long period of time, which includes manicuring their beaks and talons and things like that. So that's what this group of birds are. They've sort of self-identified because they're fairly calm, tolerant of being worked with and handled, and so therefore they're easier for the novice to kind of learn from.
Remember to give her some slack.
Yeah.
All right. Make sure her wing's not going to be hitting that leash. And then we'll take it out of the other building. For your first time getting the bird, was that your first time? Or?
No, I thought it was first time.
Well, this is a male Harris's hawk. This is one of the few non-indigenous species that we have. This is probably a second or third generation captive bred bird. It's about 24 years old and was originally used in the sport of falconry. And retired from that at probably about age 10 or 12, and then was used in a captive breeding project himself for a few years. And then as he got a little bit older, was donated to our program for educational purposes. So we've had this bird, I would have to look and see, but probably at least a dozen or more years. As is the nature of most Harris hawks, which is a fairly social and gregarious species, he by nature is fairly calm and very tolerant of people, actually sort of welcomes being around people. And so he lends himself very nicely to using for educating people about general characteristics of raptors and something about a species that's not necessarily a local bird. My greatest interest is actually in the captive breeding, where we have tried to focus on the North American accipiters, which in New York, as you may know, are a species of special concern. The populations are not threatened or endangered, but they are somewhat suspect in some cases, and so we have tried to acquire birds of those species that are useful for breeding and then produce offspring that are healthy and normal, and systematically try to release them back into the wild. I would say that the biggest impact that the program has had, I would think, is probably two areas. One is in meeting the interests and needs of our undergraduate population that increasingly have an interest in non-traditional species other than just our domestic animals or companion animals, but wildlife and exotics and so forth. And they have really become very, very involved in what goes on out here, and I think it's been very successful in that area in particular. And I think just as a sort of as ambassadors for the university, you know, we are involved with thousands and thousands of people every year in these public education programs. Our brightest and best students are going out and talking about identification and natural history, you know, fielding questions as experts. That is, I think, a very, very welcome thing, not just in the Cornell community, but the greater Ithaca, Tompkins County area. So I think in those two areas in particular is probably where we've had our greatest impact.
So over that shed?
Yep, I'm right over the top of the shed.
All right, buddy, good luck.
Nope. Almost like he's done that before.